Are you tired of spending too much of your hard-earned money at the supermarket? Are you dreaming of farm fresh eggs, homegrown veggies, and homemade everything? Well, welcome to Ditch the Store, where we break free from supermarket dependence and take back control of our food and household essentials. I'm CJ, and I'm here to show you that life is too short for store-bought eggs. So let's get started. G'day everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ditch the Store. I nearly coughed then as I started. Sorry people. If you had your volume up high, you would have been going, what the fuck is Cass doing? Anyway, now that I've cleared my throat, all in your ear, which is I'm sure what you loved while you're driving along. This week we are talking about a simple sourdough loaf. So just the basics of what you need to get. And the reason that I want to go through this is because it seems to be something that really puts people off doing it. They think it's a really complicated process because it's not just a matter of mixing it all together, kneading it and chucking it into a container, into the oven. It's not that simple. So people think it's complex, but it's actually not that complex. And it's one of those things that practice makes perfect. As you do it, you will get so much better at it. But before we get into that, I just wanted to do a shout out to all of our farming communities that are in the mid-north coast of New South Wales at the moment. For those that don't live in Australia or even on the East Coast, because I'm sure the West Coasters that listen would be aware, but probably not, it's not in your news feed all the time. We have had some horrendous flooding here. Now, we were in drought, and we still are in drought in parts of New South Wales and Victoria. So we really needed the rain. And, you know, as farmers, I think people that don't live on land, or particularly people who aren't off-grid with their water supply, don't realise just how vital it is that we get a constant and consistent water supply coming in. We have a 110,000 litre water tank, which services all of our showering, washing and drinking water, cooking, that kind of thing. We have 5 dams on the property and a natural spring that service our animal water and any gardening water that we may need. If we need to wash the car, we'll use dam water. We don't use tank water for that. Not that we wash our cars very often. There's not much point on dirt road. You just get covered in dirt again anyway. But for people that can simply turn on a tap and know that there's always going to be a water supply, you may not understand just how vital it is for farming communities to have that regular and consistent water supply coming in from the sky, which is where we get it from. It's where everybody gets it from. But the difference is for us, ours doesn't get funneled through a water supply system first. And unfortunately for the guys up on the mid-north coast, where they weren't in serious drought, they were a bit dry, but they weren't in serious drought, they have been inundated over the last 10 or so days, and people have lost their lives, people have lost their houses, people have lost livestock, farming sheds. I saw a photo of a shed literally floating down a river with a whole bunch of round hay bales, the same that we buy from our stock feed supplier, round hay bales that they wrap in plastic to keep them lasting a bit longer. I think they ferment a little bit in the plastic, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it raises the sugar level of the food and it gives more energy to the animals. But they were literally floating down the river, wrapped in plastic. And there's no coming back from that. They've lost thousands, probably millions of dollars worth of stock feed, buildings, sheds, houses, not to at all take away from the fact that people have actually lost their lives in these floods. So I just want to do a shout out to anybody listening from the mid-north coast. We are thinking of you, and we hope that the water subsides soon, and we hope that the local council start taking it seriously about having levee banks in places along these river areas that are consistent flooders. And I know they're consistent flooders. I used to live in a little town called Casino in northern New South Wales many, many years ago when I was still at university. So that's how long ago that was. And I went to Southern Cross University in Lismore and worked in Casino because I was only going to university part-time. And Lismore, I ended up working in Casino and then in Lismore also. Lismore regularly floods. It has terrible levee bank systems, and probably once every 10 years it gets an absolutely life-changing flood. But I have lived through those floods. I have also worked out at Weewar, which is in northern New South Wales. And when it floods out there, it's on the Liverpool Plains, which is a big flat area of land. And when it rains out there and gets to flood levels, there is no stopping it. You get stuck for days. And they do have levee banks, excuse me, and their levee banks are quite functional. But if you are coming through at a particular time when a flood is on, you can get stuck. And they have little, like almost camp areas with water supplies sitting outside of the levee bank area, so that if you're stuck and you can't cross, at least you've got water and you can just sleep in your car until the water subside. But, flooding, it brings horrendous issues with it. There's mosquitoes, there's the cleanup afterwards, there's stock that have been affected by the water, so you have feet problems afterwards, things like that. I really hope that you're doing okay if you're on the mid-north coast, and we are thinking of you. Meanwhile, we are getting torrential rain down here, and where I live, there is no chance of flooding. We are halfway up a hill to start with, but we're in a very mountainous area, so when it rains here, the worst that happens for us is our roads get really bad, and both the handy helper and I have been bogged in the last week just coming into our driveway. So that kind of indicates to you how much rain we've had if we're getting bogged on our driveway. But 5 out of our 5 dams, only one of them was still had water in it. So the big inundation of water that we've just had has filled all of our dams back up. Springs are filled up. The water tank's looking fantastic. We're almost at a point where we would have to buy water for us to have for drinking water, showering, things like that. And we now don't have to do that. So I'm very grateful for the rain, and I'm hoping that some of it is going a bit further out west, especially into Victoria. I know they're struggling down in Victoria at the moment with a really bad drought season. So hopefully they'll get some rain and get some grass growing again for livestock fodder, because at the moment they're really struggling. Anyway, that being said, we're going to talk a quick, and it won't be a very long one, this one, because I'm going to walk it through, but I'm also going to try and put something up on YouTube. And I may not put the podcast as I normally do up on YouTube. I might just put a run through a video of me actually making some sourdough, but we'll see how we go. Anyway, what was the other thing I was going to... Oh, and for anybody that's linked into my website or anything, over the next week, there'll be some changes made to my website. It was always www.mojohomestead.net, and I've changed it over. And in the next week, it should now be www.ditchthestore.com. And there'll be some changes to the page. I was having a few problems with the provider that I was with for my website, and so I've made the jump and leapt to another one, which is always, it's so much work changing everything over. People don't realise how much work goes into the back end of a website, but it'll be up and running, and lots of freebies will be available. When they're all available, I will put something out saying, if you want a freebie, this is where to go to get them. So what have I got on my list? Ingredients and tools. Let's go through that first. I'm just going to have a sip of tea. So we often say that when you go to the supermarket and you look at bread in the supermarket, you can really tell whether it's proper sourdough or not, because you look at the back of the ingredients, and what it should say is flour, water, salt. If it doesn't just have those 3 ingredients, then it's not proper sourdough. Sourdough doesn't require all those preservatives, all the colorings, all the flavorings, all the things. It doesn't require that. The whole joy of sourdough is that the taste comes from the starter, comes from the wild yeast that you're using to inflate the bread, to grow the bread. But everything else just comes from flour, water, and salt. If you have to add flavour to it, if you have to add colour to it, it's ultra processed in my mind if you're adding flavour and colour to it. Bread is a processed food. There is no getting around that. It is absolutely a processed food. Do we want to eat an ultra processed food or a processed food? I'd rather go with the processed. So, strong white flour. Now, if you didn't listen to my flours episode last week, go back. Which flours work? Last week, we talked about all the different flours. And like I said, I'd watched a video of a guy who tested out pasta flour, like the really good quality, Italian pasta flour, versus just all-purpose flour and bread flour. And the pasta flour did terribly. The bread was horrible. The bread flour and the all-purpose flour were right on par with each other. So you don't have to buy specific specialised bread flour. or pasta flour or anything like that. You can just go with all-purpose flour, which for us in Australia is referred to as plain flour. As I said last week, try to avoid the bleached versions, get the unbleached version. You don't need extra additives in your food. But people say you need a strong flour. Now, plain flour, I've been using plain flour. Well, I think I actually had a look. The one that I get, it says bread flour, but I can't tell the difference between that and the plain flour that I used to get. But in the big bags from Costco, I just buy the biggest, cheapest flour I can get. And it does say bread flour on it, but it's essentially just white flour. That's all it is. Now, once you have a really strong starter, the quality of the flour, it may impact the bread a little bit, but it shouldn't impact it that much. If you've got a really strong, healthy starter, and the bread that I made today, I've just finished doing all my cooking for the day because the sun was out in the middle of the day and I wanted to use the power. So I did all my cooking and my starter didn't look as fluffed up as it normally does. It's been very cold here over the last couple of days, so I think maybe that's impacted my starter a little bit. I'm hoping that my bread is still going to rise because it didn't really pass the float test that I did. So we'll see how we go. But for one loaf, you're looking at about 500 grams of strong white flour or plain flour, whichever one you prefer. If you can afford the really good quality ones, go for it, try them. You'll work out pretty quickly what you like and what you don't. 350 grams of water. Now, when you're doing bread measurements, everything's in grams, and I love that because I just set up my scale, hit it to tar, to zero, and then weigh out as I go. But 350 grams of water at room temperature. Now, you don't want it hot. I don't mind using it reasonably warm in my starter when I'm boosting up my starter because I feel like it gives it a bit of a boost, but you don't want it super hot. You just want it tempered. You don't want cold water going into the starter because the cold water will kind of make the starter less active really quickly. So room temperature, whatever that is in your house. Now, obviously, if you're in a really cold area, room temperature might be really cold, so don't go room temperature, go a little bit above that. And 100 grams of active starter. Now, when I say active starter, it has to be at that peak rise. So fed 4 to 6 hours before and bubbling, actively bubbling. And as I said last week, I think in the first week I might have said it that we were going through breads, do a float test. So take a little teaspoon of starter and drop it into some of that 350 grams of room temperature water. If the starter floats on top of the water, it's good to go. That's a really active, healthy starter. Like I said, today when I was making my bread, the starter kind of sunk a little bit and I was like, oh, that may not be as fluffy, but it had risen. It had been sitting near my fireplace, so the room temperature near the fireplace is obviously a lot warmer than the rest of the house. Anyway, you want it when it's on the rise, when it's in that fluffy state. You don't want it when it's 10 hours later and it's flat and dried out again and looking like it needs a good feed. And about 10 grams of salt. Now, whatever salt you use, it doesn't matter. When I make focaccia, I like to use sea salt, like the granule sea salt, because when I make focaccia bread, it's nice to get those like bites of salt in between. But when I'm making normal bread, I buy, I think it's a 30 kilo bag. It's really heavy, a 30 kilo bag of salt from Costco. And so it's sitting in a tub and I just take out a container and leave it in the kitchen. And it's just the standard salt. It's got none of the additives to it. It's not special table salt or any crap like that. It's just plain salt. And that's what I use for my preserving or any fermenting that I'm doing as well, because it's cheap. I can use heaps of it and it doesn't matter. Nobody cares if you use 500 grams. I made vegetable stock up today. I make a big batch of vegetable stock and freeze it in the freezer, and we just scoop it out if we're doing recipes like spaghetti bolognese. We do a veggie stock to add to it just to give it that salty, hit. And I used 160 grams of rock salt because I wanted to use the rock salt in it because it just gives it a bit more zing. But the cheap salt, there's nothing wrong with it. Use it. People get really worked up about salt, and since I've done the carnivore thing, I tend to get very not worked up about salt. We need salts, and every time I have kind of gone low salt, I end up with massive leg cramps. So clearly my body needs salt, but don't freak out about it. It's only 10 grams. It's not going to hurt you. And it helps, and we'll explain why in a sec. So what kind of tools do you need? Well, a really large mixing bowl helps, and I like to use either a glass or metal one. A ceramic one, if you had it, would be great. I never have ceramic ones here because I'm a fumble fingers and I'll drop it and break it. But the glass one that I've got has been dropped a couple of times and not broken, so we're doing well with that. But I've got 2 metal ones that I use at the moment. Now, some people get really funny about metal and sourdough. I've never had a problem. I mix with metal implements and all that kind of thing, and it's really not impacted my sourdough making at all. So fingers crossed it's not having any impact. Obviously, a jar for your starter. So if you haven't already got a jar with your starter in it, then you need to get that sorted, because you need to really get your starter going about 12 days before you want to start making bread. And if you've been listening to this series of podcasts, you probably have already got your sourdough going. Hopefully you've got it named and it's bubbly and active and doing all the wonderful things. But have the bowl for that. Then what we do is we need a bench scraper or a spatula. Now, I don't have a bench scraper. I don't use a special bread bench scraper. I literally just use a really firm spatula. It's a rubber spatula that's quite firm on its edge, so I can lift the dough out of the bowl by sliding it all the way along and get it all off the edge of the bowl. Now, you can buy specialist stuff, and I was actually looking to import some stuff from China to sell on Amazon, and was looking at bannetons, and I'm still looking at them. And, and the next one is a banneton. Now, banneton is usually a cane basket that has a liner inside it, which will be cotton, muslin, linen, that kind of thing. So a natural fabric liner inside it that you flour. And when you are doing your risers, you put your dough into the bowl, the cane bowl or basket, but you have the liner in there. So the dough's not up against the cane, because the cane would be a nightmare to keep clean if that was the case. So you have your linen cloth or cotton cloth inside the basket, and you put your dough on that. Now, the cotton cloths, you flour them. And I've seen people use them and they don't look like they get washed very often. And I reckon they probably don't. And I don't think it'd be a real issue. I think because it's only the dough sitting in it for a period of time, and you flour it quite well so it doesn't stick. So it doesn't, I don't think it really affects it. I think you could probably get away with washing it once every 6 months and you'd be right. Now, if you don't have one, and I don't have one, I don't have a banneton at the moment. I've never used one. I did have one and it went funky, because I wasn't using the cloth in it properly. And so bits of dough were touching the edge of the cane and it went really yuck. So that's why you have to use the liner. So if you've got a banneton, don't use it without a liner. If you don't have a liner, a clean tea towel will do the job. It just has to be cotton or linen or something natural. You don't want to be putting plastic in there. Now, if you don't have a banneton, and like I say, I use a bowl with a cloth tea towel, a clean tea towel that's cotton, and I just line the bowl with that, sprinkle flour all over it, and that's what I put my dough in. Now, that being said, I also, because I make sandwich bread for the kids, I also don't always use a banneton-shaped bowl to do my dough. Quite often, I will put the dough straight into a bread tin. So a long sandwich loaf, and I will put it in there for proofing. And all I do is flour the whole thing. I don't put cloth in there. I don't put paper in there, anything like that. I just flour it all, and I've never had a problem with the loaf coming out of the tin without a problem. And I've never had a problem with it not rising in the tin. It rises, and so I've actually had ones where they've risen and almost fallen out of the tin. They've gone that high. So that's obviously overproofing and not recommended. You can also, use a Dutch oven, a lidded Dutch oven. And that's what I've been using lately. I've got a red one that the handy helper bought me from one of the local places here. They're on special. And it's a cast iron pot, enamelled on the inside. And I line that with a bit of paper, and I can use that to cook in as well. So that one's a good one. And I like that because it kind of, if I'm doing a round loaf, I really like that one because it gives it a steam factor in there. So there's a certain level of steam that you need to make the really crusty edges on sourdough. And without that kind of steam effect of it being in a Dutch oven, it just doesn't work as well. And the last thing that you need is razor blades. Sounds weird, I know. Bear with me. You have to score the bread. And if you don't know what scoring is, it's just simply cutting the bread to allow some of the steam to come out of the bread. Otherwise it gets a bit, and And I forget to score it regularly, let me tell you. It won't ruin it, but it doesn't make it as nice as what it is if you do score it. So without worrying about timings or anything like that, I'm going to rattle some timings off, but try not to stress about timings. Try not to think about, oh my God, I need to write down a list of when to do what and, get up at midnight and do another fold or do another turn, or you don't need to worry about that. If you miss something, it's honestly not as bad as what you think, and it can be very forgiving. So first up, combining all your ingredients. You want to mix your water and your sourdough starter together first up. And you want to give it a really good mix, not whisk it, but you want to really mix the sourdough starter in with the water so that there's no clumps, no big, massive clumps. And you'll notice that if you just get a fork and just give it a little bit of a whisk, you'll notice that it just ends up looking like coloured water and there'll be no big lumps of starter. Now, make sure that it is active. Like I said, drop it in. If it floats on the water, that's perfect. That's exactly what you want. So give it a good mix. You don't want any big clumps. Once that's all done and it's all mixed in lovely, that's when you want to add your 500 grams of flour. Now, I just dump it all in and then I get my hard-sided spatula and just keep turning it over. And what you're trying to achieve is an even distribution of liquid with flour. And that becomes important later on. If you've got big chunks of flour in there, it's not going to be as nice. So make sure that all of the flour is mixed with water and it's all mixed in with the dough, so you've not got big chunks sitting there. Now, once you've got that done in, and here's where I think it's one of those things where there's going to be arguments amongst, die-hard sourdough makers and bakers and things like that. Some people will add the 10 grams of salt in with the flour before they do the big mix. And that's what I do because I'm lazy and I can't be stuffed waiting to do fancy things. Now, I have tried it the other way. So the other way is to mix it all in, wait till the flour is completely hydrated by the liquid in there, and then sprinkle 10 grams of salt over the top. Leave it for a little bit, just leave it, 10 minutes, and then give it a good mix in. That's the other way of doing it. Now, some people won't add the 10 grams of salt until the flour and water has gone through what they call an autolyse. Autolyse is just a fancy word for the flour's getting hydrated by the liquid in there. And that can be an hour, 2 hours. People have all these weird time frames for it. Honestly, that sounds like so much more work than what I am prepared to do. I am always time poor. So for me, if I can just add 10 grams of salt in with the flour and give it a really good mix, that's winner, winner, chicken dinner. So it's up to you. And I would say just keep it really simple starting out. Keep it simple. But once you've got a bit more of a handle on making sourdough, if you want to muck around with waiting till the flour is completely hydrated before you add your salt and things like that, by all means go ahead and do it. I often joke with the kids that making sourdough in our house is like a science experiment, and it really is. It's testing the water continuously, and you do have to tweak your recipes. So at the moment that the formula that I gave you at the beginning, so you don't even talk like it's a science experiment. The formula I gave you at the beginning is what I'm using at the moment, but there's been other times when I've tried other ones. That one's the best one for me. That's working the best for me where I live, in a kind of higher altitude area, cold in winter, hot in summer. That's the one that's working. So once everything is distributed, what you want to do is then have that autolyse period. Now, like I said, you can either add the salt before it autolyses or after. And that's something that you'll have to work out what works best for you. I add it before. So what I'm essentially doing, and that's what my dough is doing right now, it's sitting at room temperature, anywhere between half an hour if you're in a really, really warm area, up to 2 hours, okay? And you just want it to really sit and soak. And your dough will look it won't necessarily look like dough. It might look a bit sloppy. It might look a bit ordinary. You might look and go, how's that going to ever turn into a piece of bread? Don't stress. Trust the process. Leave it. I would say definitely leave it an hour. If you're in a colder area, leave it 2 hours. Some people say half an hour. I've never had one that I thought was ready to turn over at half an hour. And I probably did turn it over at half an hour and probably stuffed it. So just checking my list here. Yep. So dissolving the starter properly, that's really important. So dissolving the starter in the water, just because it more evenly, an even mixture. Adding the salt we've discussed. Some people get so worked up about it. If you say, I'll just chuck the salt in. Oh, no, you've got to wait till after the auto-lease. Okay, whatever. And the thing with the auto-lease, I have got here a benefit that I wanted to mention, and that's that it helps with gluten formation. And gluten formation in bread is what binds the bread. It's what makes it strong and makes it hold together. If you didn't have that kind of strength, you would end up with like I want to say a cake or a pancake mixture, which is what it would end up looking more like. It would fall apart, whereas the auto-lease allows the gluten to really gel together and make the bread stand up high, but also make it a bit tougher and hold together better. And it makes it easier to handle it in subsequent steps, which we're about to cover. Now, where am I? Yeah, I've got on here, in really warm environments, you might get away with 30 minutes for an auto-lease, but I'd probably go an hour. I go an hour when the fire's on in here, so I would say an hour. So stretch and fold is our next stage. So just say, we're going to say somewhere between an hour and 2 hours, your auto-lease period's done. It looks very hydrated. It might look a little sloppy to start with, and you'll think, oh, that doesn't look like bread dough. Don't stress. It's all good. It's going to get better. So then we do a thing that's called stretch and fold. And the stretch and fold is a thing that promotes the gluten to do that gelling together, to make the gluten strong. Now, when you're stretching and folding, you don't want to rip the dough apart. That's not the aim of it. What you want to do is gently, and you'll get used to it where I do it pretty rough now, but start out doing it gently. You lift one side of the dough up and fold it over the dough. Then you turn it a quarter of a turn, lift that side of the dough up and fold it over, and you keep repeating that until you've done all 4 sides. Then you can go through and do like turn it a quarter and do quarter and then do that 4 times. So each second quarter. Does that make sense? So you're turning it at the 15-degree mark, at the 90-degree mark. So you're turning it 90 degrees and folding it, and then turn it 45 degrees and then turn it every 90 degrees to fold it again. So a second fold to get all the other corners in. That I probably explained that terribly, but the idea is that you are lifting the edge and folding it over, and that promotes that strength in the gluten. Now, you want to do that stretch and fold about 3 or 4 times, and I do it every half hour. So in probably about half an hour when I finish this podcast recording, I will go and do my first stretch and fold, and then I'll go and do other things and come back. And it doesn't have to be exactly half an hour. I've done it where it's been like an hour in between because I've been outside doing something and forgotten. But roughly every half hour, come in, fold, do your stretch and fold, leave it covered again, go do something else. In that period, it should go from a bit of a sloppy mess to stretchy, really looking like dough. And when it gets to that point, when it's really, you're pulling it up and folding it over and it's staying completely intact and looking really firm and stretchy and it's got some real texture to it, that's when you know that you're probably at the right point. Now, after you've done all your stretches and folds, and I know this probably does sound complicated, but honestly, I have it sitting on the bench and just kind of remember to do it. I don't know how, I don't set an alarm or anything. Then you want to do your first rise, which is called your bulk ferment. And that's allowing that dough to really do its thing. Now, depending on the temperature in your house, 4 to 6 hours. Usually I'll try and get all the stretches and folds done before I go in to pick up my kids from school and take them to their afternoon sports. And the dough will sit on the kitchen table literally until we get back from sport. And sometimes it sits there until after dinner because I've forgotten about it. But it's a cooler room where it's sitting. It's sitting actually in my dining room. And it's a cooler room. And so it'll sit there for 6 hours and do a big rise, a big ferment. Once it's gone up, and you'll know it'll look puffy. You'll shake it and it looks like jelly. You touch it and it looks puffy. When you touch it, it may deflate really quickly. Don't stress. That's exactly what it's meant to do. It should have essentially doubled in size while it's been sitting there doing that bulk ferment. So at the end of the 4 to 6 hours, usually right before I go to bed, I will get it out and do the shape and get it ready for its second rise. And to do the shape with sourdough, what's best to do if you're making a round sourdough, not in a bread tin, is You're essentially rolling the flour on a floured breadboard or on a floured silicon mat, rolling it and tucking it under itself. You want the surface of the dough to get tight, not shiny tight. It's not like you're making, mozzarella cheese. You don't want that kind of really super shiny tight, but you do want to make the surface smooth. And if it's done its ferments and done its rises and the gluten's really kicked in, you'll get it into a beautiful little tight ball of dough. Once you get it to that point, and some people seem to go for ages doing it. I don't. I probably do 3 or 4 turns and 3 or 4 rolls and get it to that. And once I get it to that point, I have lately seen a girl do a really good one where she spread it out into like a rectangle and then folded 2 sides over into the middle and then rolled it up, and it made a beautiful tight ball. And then she just turned it a few times on the floured surface just to bring it in underneath, because you want where the join is, where all the dough's kind of joined underneath, you want that nice and tight. So then once that's done, that's when you can put it into your bowl with a tea towel to get that beautiful round dough shape. And essentially you just make sure that it's a really well floured surface. You don't want the dough to stick at all. So really well floured surface. And you always put it shiny tight side down. So the join side, the side where there's maybe a little bit of dags and it doesn't look as great, you want that on the top. And you can kind of pull the dough together a bit to kind of squeeze it together to make it kind of sit better, so there's not so big a gap in the middle. But you want the round side, the tight round side down. Now, once you've got it into your banneton or your bowl that you've lined with a tea towel, this is the important bit. Don't be scared to put it in the fridge. I used to be terrified of the idea of putting it in the fridge overnight. I think it's not going to rise. The temperature's not going to be right. Sourdough is fantastic for rising in the fridge. And I've actually just recently we had family crisis, and I ended up leaving bread in the fridge for 48 hours before I cooked it, and it turned out beautiful. It was perfect. And I left cinnamon scrolls in there as well for 48 hours. I had both of them proofing in the fridge. And we had a drama with cars and things like that, and couldn't get home in time to do anything. And in the end, I just went, you know what? Nah, it can just stay in the fridge and I'll do it tomorrow morning. So put it in the fridge to proof. And particularly if you're in a hot area, if you're in a hot climate or you've got a fireplace like we have running all the time, put it in the fridge to proof for the second rise. If you are in a real hurry and you're going to cook it that day, you can leave it out to proof outside for about 2 to 4 hours. But at that point, it's usually, 8, 9 o'clock at night for me. And so I stick it in the fridge, and it stays in the fridge for about 8 to 10 hours. So because I'm off grid, I have to wait till the sun's up before I can put my oven on. So I leave it in the fridge, and 8 to 10 hours later, get it out of the fridge. Now, I do usually, some people say you can put it straight out of the fridge into the thing. I usually have it sitting on the bench for about an hour before it goes in the oven. But you can put it, I have done it, you can put it straight into your Dutch oven to cook it. Now, when you go to put it into your Dutch oven or whatever you're cooking it in, whether it's in a bread pan or in a Dutch oven, or if you're just cooking it on a flat pan on the shelf, you can do that too. If the gluten's strong enough, it should hold high enough. Don't forget to score your loaf. I forget it all the time. I've got to get a proper bread scorer. I just use a sharp knife, like a little paring knife I've got, but I really need to get a proper bread scorer. Score it, because what it does is it lets some of the steam out and it allows it to rise and get healthier in its cook. And if you don't do that, what I've found is it can be, I want to say that word moist that everybody hates. The bread can be a bit softer, which is great if you've got kids and you're making a sandwich loaf. If I forget to score it, it's not the end of the world. The kids will just eat anyway. But if you are trying to get that really beautiful, round, crunchy, crispy edged sourdough loaf, definitely score it. Score it across the top. You can make little patterns with it if you're artistic. I'm not. I'm terrible. I just cut it so that there's a few gaps in it to let the steam out. Do that. Now, it needs to go into a really hot oven to start with. So I have it on 220, 230 Celsius, which is about 450 Fahrenheit. I heat my Dutch oven up before I put it in. So I put it in the oven, turn the oven on, make sure it's up to temperature. Then I get my Dutch oven out. I've already got some paper sitting in there. I then put the dough in on the paper, put the lid back on the Dutch oven. You want a steam bath. You want to get the steam going for that first cook, and then put it back in the oven. Now, leave it covered with the lid on in the Dutch oven for 20 minutes at that high temperature. Once it's done 20 minutes, then take the lid off. And that's important to get that beautiful brown, crispy skin. I want to say it's like sourdough bread skin, and go probably another 20, 25 minutes, depending on your oven and the outside temperature. It will be done when you tap the outside of it and it sounds hollow. If you give it a tap and it's nice and crispy on the outside, that's it. It's ready to come out. Now, so just to briefly touch over the things that you want to watch for at each stage is your starter should float in the water. If it doesn't float in the water, it's not ready. Dough, it should feel bouncy and smooth when you've done all your stretch and folds. So it shouldn't be sloppy and messy still at that point. Once you've done your stretch and folds, it should be looking like dough. Proofing, after you've proofed it, and this is the second proofing, so your second rise is your proofing. When you poke it, so if it's been sitting in the fridge and you've got it out of the fridge and you're like, gee, it's been in there for 8 hours, I wonder whether it's ready to go. Touch it, just push your finger into it. If it rises back up from where your finger indent was, then it's good to go. And tap it on the outside when you think it's done in the oven, and you will know if it's cooked because it will sound hollow, and that means it's good to go. Remember, if you fail, I shouldn't say failure. Failure is just working out a way that it didn't work. So you really need to keep that in mind. I have made some absolute fucking doozies when it comes to bread. I have had flat breads. I have had breads that I didn't score and they were just soft and like they didn't have proper skin on them, you know. I've had ones that I've overproofed and the bread dough was like, it was like dough still inside. It was horrible. The chooks got those. Don't stress. You're still having a crack. You're still better off than, it's like that saying, you know, when you see somebody at the gym who's a little bit chunky, you know, probably needs to be at the gym more than most people. And people go, oh, you know, what are they doing? And it's like, well, they're doing more than half the population who are sitting on the couch eating, you know, twisties. Ugh, and not doing anything. You're still having a crack. Pat yourself on the back even when you fuck it up. It's okay. You'll survive. If you've got chooks or pigs, they love it. They love fucked up bread because they get it. And people say, don't feed it to your chooks because it'll ferment in their croup and all this kind of stuff. Mine don't get it often enough to have that be a problem. But when they do get it, it's a bit of a treat and they go to town on it. So if you fuck it up, just feed it to the chooks, feed it to the pigs. They will love you for it. Now, what else? Let me have another sip. What can go wrong? Everything can go wrong. But when you start getting it right, you'll be really pleased with yourself. So there are things to watch for. The two main ones are flat loaf, which could be overproofed, under kneaded, which I don't need my sourdough that much, so I don't really think that's an issue. Usually it's overproofed, or too wet. So if there's too much moisture in there and it didn't kind of absorb into the flour enough, you didn't give it time to sit and really do that autolyse, it can be a bit of a flat loaf. It just won't hold its height as well. Don't worry, still tastes good. And like I say, if you've got chickens or pigs, they'll love you for it. Underproofed. Dense crumb, so not that lovely holy bread, you know, where you get like big air pockets in the bread, and a tighter texture, so it'll look more like sandwich loaf. But it's still a win. It still works okay. The only one that I think, if you go too far overproofing, you will end up with potentially like a doughy bread on the inside, and that one is the one that always ends up with the chooks because we can't eat that. It's a bit gross. But if you think your starter's part of the problem, just make sure that you are getting that really good rise out of it because that will help get your bread to rise. And remember to keep notes. I said to you last week I keep my little book. I've actually just added to my little book. I've got sweet dough in there. You probably won't be able to see that in the camera, but sweet dough recipe that I'm using for cinnamon scrolls. Write it down. If it works, right next to it, it worked. If it doesn't work, right next to it didn't work, try a different one next time. Now, the important bit, eating your sourdough. And I know that sounds weird, like as if I need to tell you how to eat your sourdough, but please, please, please let it cool for at least an hour before you cut into it. I am the most impatient person in the world, and believe me, I have cut into it, probably 20 minutes, half hour out of the oven, and it makes the bread go a bit funny. It's one of those horrible things where it lets too much steam out and it doesn't kind of allow it to sit. It's a bit like sitting your steak before you eat it, letting it sit to settle after you've cooked it. It really does make a difference. If you absolutely can't wait and you're all going to just scoff the bread straight away, go for it, go to town, have at it. But if you want the bread to last maybe a day or two, it's about the most that sourdough lasts in our house, leave it for an hour before you cut into it, just to allow it to really settle and let the steam escape very slowly, and so it doesn't kind of flop on you. And it won't flop like a souffle flop, it just won't taste as good. It gets kind of dry really quick. Now, you can wrap it in a tea towel or store it in a paper bag. I'm actually just about to bring out, I'm working with my supplier over in China or Vietnam or wherever she is now. I'm just about to bring out sourdough bread bags that you can store your bread in. So watch this space. Once they're available, I'll let you know. But you want to keep it not in a plastic bag as such. Plastic bags tend to sweat a bit and they'll make the crust of the bread a little bit less sourdoughy. So try to avoid that. If that's all you've got, have at it, use it. But if you can store it in a paper bag, a tea towel bag, or mine are going to be bags with like a beeswax wrap lining inside them, and they're really good. You can wipe them out and things like that. I've been test running one at the moment. Now, freezing. You can freeze them and you can pop them straight out of the freezer into the toaster for brekkie. But to be honest, sourdough never lasts long enough in our house to be frozen. Usually it gets eaten within 24 hours. I think at the most we'll get to 36. And then the kids are going, you've got another loaf coming, haven't you, Mum? Because we've just used up the last of that one. So that's it. Now, if you have had a crack at making sourdough, please link me in on social media and say, here's my sourdough, CJ, this is what I did. I'd really like to see. And I'm happy for you if you're trying. Even if you bugger it up, don't stress. But if you have a win, let me know, because I will be your biggest cheerleader. I'll cheer you on the whole way. And next week, I'm going to be talking about fermenting, because there's a few little nuances to it that are good to know. And I'm going to try and put together a timetable because I know some people like to follow like a proper, scheduled kind of list. I'll try and put together a scheduled list so that you can do it. And I'll work it in from the perspective of somebody who's going to be out of their house during the day and at work, because I think that's what holds a lot of people back from making sourdoughs. They think, well, I'm going to be out all day and it needs attention, so there's no point me doing it because I won't be there to give it that attention. When you could really work around your schedule and still have beautiful, yummy sourdough. So I'll try and do up a list and attach that next week or something so that you can have a look at it and have a crack at it. And don't forget, if you wanted the checklist for doing your sourdough starter over those first 12 days, it's still at mojohomestead.net/sourdough starter at the moment. I'll be swapping it over the next couple of days to the new website. So once it gets over to there, I'll let you know. And otherwise, next week, we'll talk all about fermenting, and I will see you then. I'm going to go outside and feed animals and sort things out before I have... and I'm going to go and do a stretch and fold on my sourdough first before I go and do that. Anyway, that's it for me this week. Bye for now. I'll talk to you all next week. Well, that's it for today's episode of Ditch the Store. If you're loving the journey to self-sufficiency, be sure to subscribe. You can also leave a review for us or share this episode with a friend who's ready to break up with their supermarket. If you've got questions or success stories, we'd love to hear about them on the socials. You can also find me at www.mojohomestead.net. Until next time, keep raising, growing and making. And remember, life's too short for store-bought eggs.